Today we have great privilege to learn from our honorable guest speaker, Dr. Krishnan Ganapathy, world-renowned neurosurgeon. He is past president, Telemedicine Society of India and Neurological Society of India, past president, Indian Society for Stereostatic and Functional Neurosurgery, formerly adjunct professor at IIT Madras and Anna University, emeritus professor Tamil Nadu, Dr. MGR Medical University, digital health expert, WHO, member, editorial board and reviewer for national and international journals in telemedicine and neurosurgery, 19 chapters, 90 scientific papers in index journals, presented for over 535 papers in India and over 178 overseas, formerly honorary consultant and advisor in neurosurgery. First in South Asia to get a PhD in neuroimaging in 1990. Guest lecturer, Columbia University, USA. Director, Apollo Telemedicine Networking Foundation and Apollo Telehealth Services. There is so much to say about him. For more information, please visit his website www.kganapathy.com. Let us welcome Dr. Ganapathy to our show. Sir, please. And thank you so much for your precious time in spite of being so busy. Welcome, sir.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night, ladies and gentlemen. As I understand, there are people from different places here. Now, first of all, my thanks to the organizers for arranging this talk. It all started on August the 3rd, 1966. I was in the 11th standard attending my classes when I got a phone call that my elder brother had died in a road traffic accident. That, ladies and gentlemen, was my first encounter with death, and that minute I decided I'm going to become a doctor. 6 years later, I was in the 4th year MBBS, Madras Medical College, 1972, November, and again I got a call that another elder brother of mine, my eldest brother, also met with a fatal accident. You can imagine how I would feel having lost two brothers. From 1975, I started as a postgraduate, as a resident in neurosurgery, until 2015, over 4 decades, was an active neurosurgical practice. During this time, I have encountered at least 2,500 deaths at a minimum guesstimate. I would like to start off, before I go into what exactly death is and my personal experience and what I would like to call demystifying good death. I just wanted to quote what Woody Allen said, and he said, "I'm not afraid of death, I just don't want it to be there when it happens." So I think this explains everything. On December the 25th, 1995, one of my patients was brain dead, and for the very first time in South Asia, the family was persuaded, a 28-year-old woman was persuaded to allow organ retrieval, and we did South Asia's first multiple organ transplant. This was again a tremendous experience to persuade a woman to give consent to take out the heart of her husband, take out the kidneys, etc. And believe me, they had been married just for 1 year. Even prior to that, I had got interested in thanatology, as you call the study of death, and I had written several articles on the brain dead head trauma patient as a critical organ donor. A couple of years ago, I wrote an article on brain death revisited, and to my pleasant surprise, the article has been downloaded 16,400 times worldwide. This shows the amount of interest people have in death, even though it may sound to be a very macabre and ghoulish subject to start with. Now, death is indeed inexplicable. I think the best comment is by Yudhishthira, the eldest of the Pandavas, and he said, when Yaksha asked him, what is the greatest wonder? He said, I quote, "Day after day, countless creatures reach Yama's abode, yet those that remain behind believe themselves to be immortal. None of us are prepared to accept that one day we will be leaving this world." And Yudhishthira said 5,000 years ago, what can be more extraordinary than this? I think this very much holds good in 2020 as well. The Bhagavad Gita in chapter 2 describes death very nicely. The Bhagavad Gita says, the Atman is neither born nor does it die. unborn, eternal, constant, and ancient, the Atman does not die when the physical body is extinguished. I've just picked up at random 5 quotations which cover the different ways in which death is viewed. Look at what Sadhguru said. The worst that can happen to oneself is one has to live forever. Rabindranath Tagore, death is not extinguishing the light, it's only putting out the lamp because dawn has come. On asked what happens after death, the Zen master replied, I do not know. But you're a Zen master, said the student. Not a dead one, replied the master. And so it goes on and on. We still do not really know what exactly is death. When I was a medical student, as a postgraduate, and even as an assistant professor in the 20th century, it was relatively simple to diagnose death. If a person stopped breathing, if the pupils were dilated, if there was no pulse rate, BP was not measurable, he was pronounced dead, as simple as that. Today, in 2020, particularly if a person happens to be admitted in an intensive care unit in a quaternary hospital on life support systems, believe me, it is extremely difficult to say whether somebody is alive or dead. Why is this? This was because most of us, even doctors in the initial part of the training program, believe that death is an isolated event. Death is not a specific moment in time. All of us have given death certificates. We say the patient died at 7:43 p.m., 13th September 2019. But believe me, the moment the death certificate is issued, he or she has actually been dying, not for a few hours, not for a few days, not even for a few months, but for years and years. Death occurs in utero. Even after the first trimester of pregnancy, when organs just start forming, death already occurs. Death is a continuous, ongoing process. We need to understand this thoroughly, and only then will we be able to take important decisions. The loss of the ability to integrate body functions would be the correct definition of life. Today, it is possible to keep the heart alive, to keep the kidney alive, to keep the lungs alive, and so on. But it is just not possible to coordinate and integrate all the various body functions. The difficulties in diagnosing death have been in existence for millennia. Pliny the Elder wrote 2000 years ago, so uncertain is men's judgment that they cannot determine even death itself. And absolute brilliance. The ancient Greeks, the Romans, etc., they would cut a finger 9 days after a patient was supposedly dead to be sure that he was not bleeding again. Melting of ghee on the forehead. And of course, there have been several instances recorded in history about people waking up from a coffin after they have been buried, and therefore people even started putting alarms inside the coffin to help you activate it. And I think this cartoon says it all. My brain is dead, but they have the rest of my body on a life support system. As a neurosurgeon, I have personally probably evaluated at least 150 to 175 brain dead patients and certified them as brain dead, facilitating organ transplantation. On the right-hand side, you can see the various clinical procedures which we can do. Today, a person is considered dead, even if his heart is beating, even if the pulse rate is normal, the blood pressure is normal, the lungs are expanding very well, etc., when a brain stem and one small, vital, most important component of the brain called the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla oblongata, this is called the brain stem. When this ceases to function, and there are clinical tests prescribed, these tests have to be done repeatedly over a 4-hour period by 4 different doctors independently. And when we certify that the brain stem is no longer functioning, the patient is declared to be brain dead. Now, just to emphasize the point again and again that death is an ongoing process, I would like to draw your attention that even after cardiac arrest, meaning the patient is fully dead, even after that, if you put pilocarpine into the dilated pupil, the pupils will contract, the pupils will constrict. A kidney is still functionally viable. It can be used for a kidney transplant even if it is taken out up to 30 minutes after a cardiac arrest. Skin graft can be done even 24 hours after a cardiac arrest. Arteries and veins have been successfully used for several decades even after they have been removed 72 hours after irreversible cardiac arrest. Nails and hair continue to grow. Ladies and gentlemen, what then is the point of no return? When do you declare a person really dead? I leave it to you to think about this. Now let's look at the social aspect of life. What does The Economist, one of the world's most respected magazines, what does it say? Unfortunately, in 2015 Quality of Death Index, India is ranked 67 by 80. Most of you know that today India is better than the best so far as healthcare is concerned. We have more than 150,000 people coming, not just from the Middle East and from Asian countries, but even from Europe and even the United States to India for treatment of failed procedures or treatment of complex procedures. But still, India is way behind so far as the quality of death is concerned. What makes India one of the worst places to die in? This is an article published a few years ago. Of course, things are changing. The destination, ladies and gentlemen, cannot be changed. But decisions can still be made about what the journey should be like. But it needs you and you alone to be aware and to take charge. There are very few people above the age of 70, 80 who are lucky, like Abdul Kalam, the former president of India, to die when he was addressing the IIM in Shillong. Less than 10% of people die suddenly after the age of 50. 90% of people really have time to plan their death, may have 6 months time, may have 1 year time, and so on. I would like to spend a minute or two on the quality of death. Patients dying in a hospital ward or an intensive care unit worldwide receive aggressive care. End of life management is not often discussed. We completely forget the fact that bereaved caregivers, people who look after their near and dear, when one's near and dear are admitted not in a high dependency ward, even in an ordinary ward or in an ICU for weeks and months together, there are enough studies which have shown that these caregivers run an increased risk, mortality, morbidity, developing mental health problems. World Health Organization has recognized that the problem of healthcare providers for dementia is as important as dementia itself. Management options are increasing steadily. Technology is progressing at a fantastic pace. Unfortunately, with this technology, we seldom give weightage to patients' desires. How often does a techno-savvy, state-of-the-art, absolutely fantastic cardiac surgeon or neurosurgeon really inquire into what is it that the family wants? Ethical, social, financial, and humanitarian considerations. I belong to the BC era. I'm not talking of before COVID, I'm talking of before computers. I belong to the last set of neurosurgeons in India who was trained even before the CT scan came. I was taught by my teachers that clinical practice is not technical mastery, but clinical practice requires judgment, wisdom, compassion, not technical mastery of future-ready technology. Treatment preferences. We all talk, or not even all, most of us have been trained in quality of life, but how many of us practice quality of death? To have a good quality of death, the person should not have any pain at all. Again, a paradox. India produces 90% of the morphine for the whole world, but due to some amount of prudery, the morphine was not available even to medical practitioners until about 2 to 3 years ago. Even now, it is very difficult to get morphine in palliative medicine when it is required. Death must be consistent with clinical, cultural, and ethical standards. It is again wrong to believe that just because I'm withdrawing aggressive therapy, I'm withdrawing medications and interventions, I'm stopping care. Please remember, care is never ever withdrawn. care should never ever be withdrawn, but that does not mean you have to put a patient on EMO or on ventilator or do all sorts of things just to keep the heart and the lungs beating. In bad death, there is violence, severe pain, torture, dying alone, being kept alive against one's wishes, loss of dignity, and most important, the inability to communicate one's wishes. The process of death sustains gratitude, a belief that life is still worth living, and some hope. Excessive or futile treatment are not used just to prolong life. Here again, I'm very sad that though I'm very proud that India is the leader so far as healthcare is concerned, so assisted dying is concerned, we are way behind most of the countries in the world. It was fascinating to note that as early as 1942, long time ago, Switzerland was so progressive. It had already, the legislature had already passed an act called assisted dying. Belgium extended this to children in 2020. At least 8 states in the United States of America have Death with Dignity Act. Washington in 2008, Vermont in 2013, Canada in 2015, etc. Not too late, on 9th March 2018, a 5-judge bench of the Supreme Court of India recognized living wills made by terminally ill patients and held a constitutional bench held that the right to die with dignity is a fundamental right. Unfortunately, for fear that this would be misused, there are so many ifs and buts, even though the judgment has been passed, and it's extremely difficult even today to get people understand that to register a living will, you need to get the signature of a judicial magistrate and so on. Of course, many of us are going to raise this, and we hope in a couple of years this will be sorted out. Dying with dignity. It's your life. It's your choice. Grief counseling has started in India only a couple of years ago. I remember in 1995, when I was actively involved in human organ transplant, I was a grief counselor. We had no such entity called grief counselor at that time. Even today, removal of life support systems can be done in India only if brain death is declared. And as a paradox, brain death can be declared only if there is consent for organ donation. Of course, people go around this, bypass this by what is called LAMA, discharge against medical advice. So we get it in writing that the patient does not want further treatment, is discharged against medical advice. This is sad, but again, I'm sure in a couple of years this will be sorted. Now, dying is a process that can be influenced. As medical students, as postgraduates, as young doctors, we are all taught primum non nocere. However, do no harm extends primarily to the physical body. Yes, no medical doctor generally would like to harm the physical body. But how many of us are trained? How many of us want to extend this do no harm concept to the emotional body, to economic domains? End of life discussions can be initiated, should be initiated within days or hours after admission with individuals who are in very good health, when the treating doctor, the healthcare provider, knows that he is not going to survive of more than 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, whatever it is. The quality of death. The wishes of the patient and the family takes precedence, should take precedence over using tomorrow's cutting-edge technology. I remember what Lars Lexell, the inventor of the Gamma knife, said 50 years ago. He said, a fool with a tool is still a fool. When you have a hammer, everything around you looks like a nail. And if it is an expensive hammer, even more so. It is inevitable. It is extremely difficult to avoid using 2021 technology in the hope that you can prolong life. But should you not ask the family what they want? I think this is very important. Of course, perceptions of death varies with the age and experience of the healthcare provider. I may be talking like this today, but I certainly would not have been talking like this 4 decades ago. I just want to give you a few examples to show how complex the real world is. You will not be able to learn from a journal or from a textbook or even from a teacher how to face good death, how to face bad death. You have to learn the hard way. 1978, Deepavali Day, 9 deaths. I was a postgraduate on duty at the Madras Medical College Government General Hospital. I so vividly remember from afternoon 2 o'clock to the next day morning 8 o'clock, 9 deaths occurred over 14 hours. 6th floor, 5th floor, 2nd floor, head injury ward, emergency ward. This was all that I did. You can imagine when you're barely 27, 28 years old, what it feels like to encounter 9 deaths over a period of a few hours. Massive brain hemorrhage during a wedding reception. I was an assistant professor. I was called to a wedding reception, and then even before I could get there, the patient had died during the reception, having tied the thali a few hours earlier due to a massive brain hemorrhage. One of my teachers, professor of surgery, multiple disseminated secondaries all over the body. How do you convince a professor of surgery who has taught you? But when it's your own body, you refuse to accept the fact that your end is near. You want proton therapy, you want that therapy, this therapy. The human brain refuses to accept the fact that your days are numbered. How do you tell the parents of a 2-year-old child with an extremely complex brain tumor, look, this is not a malignant tumor. Yes, the risk of surgery is high, but if they are able to get the tumor out, the child will lead a normal life. Please agree for surgery. The parents do not want, particularly in the 20th century, because brain surgery in a 2-year-old was almost unheard of then. One of my own relatives, a 92-year-old woman, bilateral stroke, left side and right side, developed a fracture of the hip. Extremely educated, intelligent children, 72 and 68 years old. They took the mother away from the ICU, took the mother home. But then she did not read the textbooks. The mother had not read the textbooks. She was unconscious for 2 months. How do you manage an unconscious mother for 2 months? And then I said, okay, you remove the Ryle's tube, you stop complete treatment. She's 92 years old. For 2 months, she's been unconscious. You're not taking a wrong decision. Even after removing the Ryle's tube, she'll live for another 3 days. This, ladies and gentlemen, is what happens in the real world. Keeping a father alive, a father with a very bad tumor. I would not have operated, I would not have irradiated, no chemotherapy, nothing. I would have persuaded the family not to do anything. I would have said, look, he's going to live for another 5 months with all this heroic treatment. Please don't let him go through all the suffering. But then his daughter's marriage has already been fixed. The wife and the husband, that is the patient himself, wanted to be alive so that he could at least see his daughter getting married. So we took the patient's desire into account and started treating him, even though I was not for treatment at all. A terminally ill pregnant woman, 8 months pregnant with a brain tumor. She's going to die in a couple of weeks, maybe. But then what do? You've got to keep her alive so that the baby comes out, just so that we were treating the unborn baby. I could go on and on like this. I could give you hundreds of such illustrations like this. But this is where a medical doctor comes into play. It is impossible to expect a family to take a rational decision, weigh the pros and cons. They are too much emotionally involved. And I think it's a duty of the specialist, whether it be a neurosurgeon, a cardiologist, a family physician, a homeopathy doctor, whatever it is our duty to explain to the family what are the pros and cons. This slide, of course, refers to 2011. I personally feel the slide is not representative of what India is today. But at that point of time, the only 5% of people in adult senior citizens in India were living alone, as compared to almost 38% in Norway. Unfortunately, India is just aping the West, and today the bird has flown, the empty nest syndrome. Most of us live alone. Our children are in excellent positions in different parts of the world, but we live alone. And therefore, you can see that in India, compared to Western countries, it's far better. But even in India today, probably about 15 to 20% of families, the people live alone. What are the major problems? Why is it that we are so afraid? We are not willing to talk about death. Lost opportunity for last wishes. Lost opportunity for life review and emotional settling of accounts. Our laws do not permit patients and families to take control. Doctors are scared of making decisions to withdraw futile care. Legal system is worried about misuse. The word trust no longer exists in the vocabulary of any community, not only India, but most other countries in the world. We have poor access to systems that control suffering at the end. And the number of people who are trained in palliative medicine is recognized as a specialty only very recently. Loss of decision-making capacity. One, of course, is the unawareness that you need to take a decision. But then please remember that you need to take a decision when you're in good health. No one knows when something is going to affect you, when your cognitive facilities may be impaired. Dementia. There are certain types of dementia where a person may live for 20 years after the onset of dementia, but his cognitive facilities have been lost. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, there's no such time as too early. We need to take a decision before. Don't think I'm only 40 years old, I'm only 60 years old, I'm only 70 years old. You need to take a decision before it is too late. And again, interestingly, for 90% of people, death is predictable. We know exactly, may not be to the nearest day, may not be to the nearest week or month, but we know, anybody knows. See, I've got diabetes, hypertension, I had a myocardial infarction, I've had a stenting, a bypass, etc., etc. I mean, I know the literature, I know that survival rate for a tumor, a 5-year survival rate for a tumor is 10%, a 2-year survival rate, and so on and so forth. We know precisely with a plus minus of 6 months, we know exactly when we are going to leave this world. I'm extremely fond of this quotation of Dr. Abdul Kalam, the renowned former president of India. He said, and I quote, "One day we will all depart on a journey free of cost. Don't worry about seat reservation. It is confirmed. The flight is always on time. Our good deeds will be our luggage. Humanity will be our passport. Love will be our visa. Make sure we do our best to travel to heaven in business class." You and I know that 99.999% of the 7.5 billion people on this world can never ever travel by business class, cannot even get into a plane. But as Abdul Kalam has repeatedly mentioned, 99% of the population of the world can travel by business class, can travel by first class. It doesn't matter who you are, what you are. You need to take a decision and inform others what you want. And remember, this is a journey which you cannot avoid. Whether you like it or not, your seat is reserved. 2A, 3A, window seat, aisle seat, everything is reserved. You may not be able to choose the carrier, but that is the 20 years ago when I started telemedicine, of course, I had no idea of the pandemic, no idea of COVID-19, but being passionate about telemedicine, I had gone on evangelizing and telling everybody that it is time that healthcare shifts. Healthcare should get out of the hospital. I have written so many articles in a doctor in your pocket, a hospital in your pocket, a laboratory in your pocket. Today, we know POCD, point of care diagnostics, which we use in our telemedicine projects throughout India. With a drop of blood, I can do liver function tests, renal function tests, etc. From the saliva, I can even be able to diagnose whether the person is a brain tumor or not. Urine examination will enable me to tell me whether the person has got a brain tumor or not in a few years. And I was absolutely delighted when no less a person than Dr. Pratap Reddy, the architect of modern hospital care in India, he made a public statement just 4 weeks ago that treatment outside hospitals is going to be the future of healthcare. Many corporate hospitals, not only in India, but worldwide, thanks to the pandemic, have realized that it doesn't make business sense to build a 1,000-bedded hospital or a 500-bedded hospital. Instead, care is going to shift. Care is going to shift to your home, to your office, DIY, do it yourself. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is going to totally change the location of care. It determines on whether you're going to have a good death or a bad death. There is enough data to show that in spite of the best ICU nurses and ICU doctors, location of care makes all the difference. Most people want to die at home. I remember my father was 93 years old. I was out of the country. I got a call that he was seriously ill, was in the hospital. I took the next flight, came back from the airport. I went straight to the hospital and brought him home. My junior doctors, younger doctors, all reprimanded me. They said, sir, you should go to the ICU. What is this you're doing? I said, I know my father. And 2 weeks later, my father passed away in the comfort of his own house, his own bed, surrounded by every one of us. He was 93 years old. This is what I call a good death. Now, we need to do this. It is very sad to see newspaper reports of 96-year-old seeking mercy killing. Day in the life of a Mumbai couple that wants euthanasia permission from the president. And contrast this with the West. Look at this for this tweet. Last night, my grandfather passed away today. Last night, all he wanted to do was to have a beer with his children and grandchildren, and that is exactly what we did. Both Barbara and George Bush died on their own beds, surrounded by their family. They were all 80 plus, 85 plus. They knew exactly when they were going. They could have had the best tested treatment in the whole universe, but they chose to die at home. Contrast this with some of the former presidents recently in India who was on a ventilator for 2 weeks. What is it we are trying to do? Why do we need to keep the lines, the hearts and the lungs just going? I am very strongly for this, and I wish Asian countries start adopting this. Death cafes, death over dinner. Groups of friends host dinner parties to process how they feel about death. How do we want to die? The movement's website prompts represents the most important and costly conversation in typical American humor America isn't having. And look at this photograph on the left. A Japanese woman, probably 85 plus. She is given augmented virtual reality, immersive reality, and so on and so forth. She is told precisely what will happen when she becomes 100 years old. We all know that Japan has a maximum number of centenarians in the world. A good quality of life is very, very important. Shakespeare's quotations I use left and right in all my talks, and here is one. Oh, let him pass. He hates him that would upon the rack of this world stretch him out longer. Why does a doctor just keep somebody alive? What is the purpose? We need to accept the fact that no doctor is a superhuman being. Nobody in the world can be kept alive. Useful quality of life. We need to decide whether we really want this or not. Again, I originally come from Kerala, and I'm very proud that the World Health Organization has certified that Kerala is the best place in India for a dignified death. The government of Kerala has the biggest palliative network in the entire country, as good as palliative networks in other countries in the world. All the 14 districts have palliative medicine care. You can see the slide speaks for itself, 100 full-time doctors and so on. Health is a state subject, and January of this year, the legislature of government of Kerala passed a legislation that Kerala doctors can take brain dead patients off life support without the family consent, and even if they're not agreeing to organ donation. This is what is required. I've been using this slide for a long, long time. I got this slide in 2012, a fantastic display of how technology saved a 7-day-old baby. The procedure cost several $1 million, and of course, very few in the world can avoid it. Maybe it's quite all right to allow this for a 7-day-old baby who probably will live till the age of 70 or 80. But do we, in 2020, need to adopt this for a 70-year-old, an 80-year-old, a 90-year-old? What about a 60-year-old? What about a 50-year-old? Where do you draw the line? Is it 70? Is it 75? Is it 80? And are you justified in spending millions of dollars? Somebody is spending the money. These are all difficult questions. I don't claim for a moment to give the answer. Confucius once said, the greatest fool can ask more questions than the wisest man can answer, and I come in that particular position. COVID-19 deaths, I've had my own friends, relatives, classmates, and it has been a terrible, terrible situation where today we grieve by typing comments in a Zoom, in a chat session, posting photos online. Right now, one of my students, a neurologist, is on a ventilator in the ICU. I cannot even go to the hospital. I will not be allowed in the ICU, irrespective of my position. I cannot even see. This is the real world, ladies and gentlemen. We have to learn to pay respects to the departing soul in a totally different way. Incidentally, MIT Technology Review, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, one of the world's leading centers, scientifically one of the foremost in the world, in an article published 2 years ago, feel that it may be possible very soon, in the near future, certainly in my lifetime, to be able to predict when you're going to die. I am not talking of giving $10 to an astrologer, looking at your palm, not that, but based on your DNA, based on your telomeres. Today we know the DNA part of aging. To a very large extent we know this, and it's possible that in a couple of years we will be able to scientifically predict when somebody is going to die. So when this is the world we are going to live in, don't you think we should plan for this last journey? I have just 2 more slides. Advanced care planning. The United States, of course, is extremely forward so far as this is concerned. I'm very happy that this is just starting in India. Advanced care planning is a process to document your specific need, your decision-making, when your decision-making capacity is still intact. Choose a power of attorney. Choose someone. Remember, when you choose your spouse, remember that she may not be all that younger. It is always better not just to choose your children, but to have someone else, because in the real world, your grown-up children may not be with you. They may be in another continent as well. All these details are available in the website, and anybody who's interested can go through this. So ladies and gentlemen, I could go on and on, but I think we need to enjoy life, not talk about death. The quality of life is very important. What is the take-home message? The take-home message is we are not immortal. I am not waiting for death. By the end of this year, I would have finished the biblical 70 years of an excellent quality of life. But I do know that I am not immortal. I'm not waiting for death, not at all. But who knows? I may live for another quarter of a century like my father. But then I am ready for death. And I think this is what every one of us should do. You and you alone have the right to decide how you want to make the final journey. You may not be able to decide from where, when, or even with whom, but you can decide how to go. So ladies and gentlemen, let's all plan to go by business class and by first class. Let's plan to do it right now. And this is what I would like to do. Thank you once again, Kavita Homeopathy Center, for letting me review my own thoughts. Whether others have benefited or not, I have no idea. But in putting this talk together, I as an individual personally have certainly benefited considerably. Dhanyavad. Thank you. Nandri.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ganapathy. It was very interesting and enlightening. So many things, and many have many questions, and our moderators will take those questions, please.
Hello, Dr. Ganapathy sir. I am Dr. Deepak Sharma from Delhi, and one of the executive member. So this is really an interesting lecture, sir, and we are glad to hear you. There is actually no question.
Hello.
So clearly. Hello.
Sorry, I missed
Yes,
your last seconds. Yeah.
So there is no question in chat. I think the reason is that you clearly mentioned all the things so that there is no questions in the mind. So thank you so much for your kind presence in CAR. Thank you so much, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Shweta.
Sir, thank you, sir, for this enlightening lecture. And we got an email from Dr. Nidhi Joshi, and she kept a question for you. Is if the death is a last stage of life, then why we are affected by it in so many ways?
Why we are?
Why we are affected by it in so many ways? Why we are affected if the death is the last stage of life, then why we are affected by it in so many ways?
You are affected by age.
Why we are affected in so many ways?
Okay. First of all, death is not a last stage of life. I have been mentioning throughout that death is a continuous process. We start to die from the moment we are born. So death is, it's a terminal stage. It is the end result of what we have been doing the previous several decades. Number one. Number two, if I could really answer your question, I would be Adi Shankaracharya himself. I would be, I don't know whom to say. I honestly, this is more a philosophical metaphysics question rather than a biological question. I really wouldn't be able to answer that. But I think what is more important is we have to accept the inevitable. We have to understand that none of us are immortal. And this was what was mentioned even in the Mahabharata 5,000 years ago. So this is the most important, to accept that. I mean, there's no, look at it another way. There is no fun in life if you don't have challenges. If there are no problems, if everybody was absolutely well all the time, you would not be a homeopathy doctor. I would not be a neurosurgeon. Unless people develop brain tumors, I will have no job to do, isn't it? So this is a part of life. If everybody is healthy from the moment they are born till the moment they leave this world, I mean, the whole world would be totally different. Today we have got the pandemic, and the pandemic has taught us so many things. I really wish I could answer your question in more detail, but this is a general view.
Thank you so much, sir, for answering this question. Over to you, Dr. Kavita ma'am.
Hello. So everyone is really enjoying, as Dr. Deepak Sharma said, it is such a nice, and luckily when I saw this one, I found this Robin Sharma's book, and everything, Who Will Cry When You Die, perfectly matched to our topic, the having, living, funeral, and celebrating our life, living a rich life to the best of our moment. And so thank you once again, Dr. Ganapati, for your precious time. And Professor Rachna would like to sing Gayatri Mantra. Do you mind?
Certainly not, please.
We have prepared this for you, sir, because we wanted to welcome in a very positive way. We are honored by your presence. Om Bhurvat Swaha Tat Savitur Varenyan Bargo Devasya Dimahi Diyo Yona Prachodaya. I have been in near-death experience myself when I operated my right lung with stage 4 cancer 11 years ago, 17th of July, 2008. I was going to be pronounced dead. I left the body into a tunnel of light, and I could hear everyone talking in the operating room, and I went somewhere else with a bigger light. I put my hands in front of my face, and the light was so intense, I could not see my hands. Then the doctor came outside and talked to my ama, and he says, your daughter is not here with us anymore. And she started praying, and for myself, I think that triggered something in myself way up there and made me come back, slowly back into the body. By the time the nurse was putting the hand on the doctor's shoulder that was animating me and performing heart animation, and she said, she's no longer with us, doctor, stop it. And I came back and I say, you never stop someone trying to bring them back. I wouldn't be back if he heard you. And she fainted. Every time I went back to the hospital for the surgery and everything else, they always wanted to touch me. She's the one that died and came back. All this stuff. And for myself, my experience is that I took advantage of this near-death experience to value more my time on planet Earth. So I have been working the past 20 years with homeless people, giving them away the homeopathy medication they need, plus other hygiene materials they need. But I think with the people I have talked that have gone through the near-death experience, they changed their lives and their way they face life. They treasure every second. Do you also have this experience with your clients, Dr. Ganapathy?
Oh, this is a fascinating story to hear from you. No, madam, though I have personally had so many patients, so many deaths, at least 2000. Most of them have been head injuries, brain tumors, subarachnoid hemorrhage, etc. Of course, I have had several instances where I have been proved to be totally wrong, where I have told the family, I don't think he's going to survive. It's not worth doing anything. And then I have proved to be wrong. Yes, maybe about 4 or 5 patients in about the last 40 years. Yes, but not as dramatically as you described. And I must really, you are a source of inspiration to us, madam. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us. It is stories like yours which all of us need to know. See, most doctors, at least many doctors, I won't say most, many doctors, we all think we are superhumans, we are gods, and that, we take the fast decision. We have to accept and understand that science can only take you up to a point. There are several instances like what you yourself just now described, where all of us proved to be wrong. My favorite, what one of my teachers taught me is that patients don't read textbooks. So what is in the textbook is not necessarily what happens in real life, because patients don't read textbooks.
Thank you so much for your blessings. It was a wonderful webinar. May God give you all the good you deserve.
And for those who want the certificate, there is a dot form which is posted, the link. Please form, and we will send the certificate. And who are watching on the Facebook, they can email us, caststudygroup@gmail.com. And we can take, Dr. Ganapathy, do you mind to let people unmute themselves and we can take 2 or 3 questions, please?
Hello, yes, please.
Yeah, please unmute.
I think Dr. Hira Agrawal want to say something. Dr. Hira Agrawal from Solapur, please.
Sir, good evening. Sir, good evening, Ganapathy sir and everybody. I have been, this is a second seminar I have been attending. It was just wonderful, unbelievable. The first one also on telemedicine was the very much informative. Now, this demystifying death, now whatever we have been given in life, how to make the best of the life, so that this is an unwritten, this is a truth that we will be dying. So how to make this life much fruitful, totally, as Abdul Kalam also said, that work is worship. Work is worship. So work is the only criteria, or that we have been doctors. So treating the sick people, making the sick people more happy is the only criteria, or some other criteria to make our life more beautiful, more fruitful before we leave this earth towards heavenly abode.
Very simple, very, very simple. Wait, I will answer your question. This is entirely contextual. It depends on the context in which the person asking the question is living in now, wants to live. There is no simple answer. It's not like appearing for an examination and giving an answer, sir. If there are 7.8 billion people on this earth, there are 7.8 billion ways in which people will find happiness. The simple, most important thing, do whatever turns you on. That is the simplest explanation. If murdering somebody gives you a kick, well, I'm not saying do that, but what I'm trying to say is do whatever you think is right. At the end of the day, we have a conscience. Nobody can take away your conscience. You and you alone know whether what you did is correct or not. My father always used to tell me, when my head hits the pillow, I go to sleep. I don't have to worry whether, somebody will come, that, this, etc. So the answer is very simple. Do whatever makes you happy. That's it. I mean, if giving webinars makes you happy, go ahead and give webinars. If making money makes you happy, go ahead and make money. You know, whatever makes you happy.
Okay. Thanks a lot, sir. Got the idea. Got that. Thanks a lot.
Please don't murder anybody. I said it just as
Never that can happen.
And Dr. Ganapati, you are receiving so many thank yous from everyone. And we can just take 1 or 2 questions, please.
I think there is no questions in the chat. Really, thank you, sir, and for the wonderful words and wonderful learnings about the death. Thank you so much from our side. And Dr. Shweta, is there any question in the email or anyone want to say?
No, sir, no more questions in the chat box or in the email. Dr. Dr. Poonam Chablani had one question. Please explain about brain death.
Okay, this will take about 3 hours to explain. So I'll explain it in just about 2 minutes. Brain death is when you can prove beyond doubt that certain functions of the brain are irreversible. Now, again, there is a difference in brain death definition in United States and India. I will talk about India. India is called brain stem death. So brain stem death is equal to brain death legally, officially. So the midbrain, pons, and medulla oblongata, the functions of these 3. Now, as you know, the brain stem is the one which controls the cardiac center, the respiratory center. So when the heart no longer gets impulses to beat from that part of the brainstem, similarly the lungs, etc., that stops functioning. Today, with modern technology, I can connect a person to a ventilator and I can deliver oxygen and take out carbon dioxide. Even if there is no blood pressure, there is very simple to give what are called vasopressors, to give adrenaline and various other drugs and ensure the patient has a good blood pressure. So brain death means that the heart is beating, that the lungs are expanding, the kidneys are secreting urine, the eyes are contracting, every other organ in the body is alive, but the brain stem alone is dead, and we confirm that it is dead because we do these tests at 4-hour intervals and 4 different doctors do these tests, so that one doctor cannot, even if he makes a mistake, 4 doctors cannot make a mistake. If you would like to have more information, very simple, just Google brain death revisited K. Ganapati and you will be able to get the entire article immediately. It's on the top of Google. As I mentioned, this article has been downloaded 16,400 times, and this is one of the most popular articles. Brain death revisited K. Ganapati. That's all.
Thank you so much, sir. Beautiful presentation and beautiful webinar. Thank you so much.